Let's go!
Look at the cat. Look at the kitty man. Has anyone ever told you they have an objectively correct opinion about a movie before? I used to do this. I find it very annoying now, in part because it's a pedantic and lazy way to justify your arguments, but also because I know the headspace that it comes from. It comes from a place of arrogance. When I was in high school, I had this elevated idea of my own opinions. I would write reviews on my own personal website that has unfortunately been lost to time, and enough people validated my takes to where I thought that my word was law when it came to whether or not a movie was good. I'm glad people enjoyed and continue to enjoy me expressing my opinions, but I bet you can imagine I was a little nerd in high school. Lately, I've seen a couple tweets go viral for responding to one of those interaction bait posts like, "What is your least woke opinion?" And among the dregs of people exposing themselves for having depressingly regressive takes on trans people, one that I keep seeing pop up time and time again is, "Not all art is political." This is a relatively inconsequential opinion in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's worth investigating. The most popular iteration that I saw from this time around was from Shafrillis, who I like quite a bit. This interaction did not lessen my opinion of him at all, by the way. I'm just using him as an example for my larger point. He started with, "Not every single piece of art ever made is political," and followed it up with, "Most art is, especially any art with a narrative, but I drew a little stick figure yesterday, and I'm sorry, I can't see how any outside societal political influences affected how I drew him." Him. There it is right there. Even that little stick figure was informed by the decision to make it a him, rather than a her, a them, or an it. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. You can make your stick figure a him all you want, but it does kind of defeat his whole argument. The decision, no matter how unconscious, to make a stick figure gendered at all is indicative of, as he put it, outside societal political influence. Shafrillis' little stick figure is not making any kind of grand political statement at all, and it doesn't have to. But there's still something to be said about why a little stick figure drawing went from a drawing on a page to a hymn. Now, before we go any further, I want to clear up something, all right? I feel like people kind of get caught up in semantics when discussing this topic. A political statement does not necessarily mean you have to say whether or not you like the president or something like that. In my opinion, any work of art that you make is going to have some kind of angle to it that informs your viewers or your audience or whatever, what you think about life, society, politics, religion, any of it. Art being quote-unquote political means that the author has opinions about the world they live in, and those opinions show up in the work that they make. So, can you make a piece of art that is truly apolitical? In my opinion, this tendency to think that you can make a piece of art that is entirely apolitical or unbiased comes from the same instinct that I had when I was writing reviews on my website in high school. And that's the thought that you can be objective. The notion of being apolitical implies some kind of objective stance, a higher ground from where you are able to see through the noise of the right and the left and speak to what really matters, the truth. The idea that you, as a human being, can look at something and make art about it that is entirely objective. I don't think this is possible. I think that everyone is subject to their own biases when creating art, and no matter how objective they try to be, they will always end up inadvertently informing the audience of their perspective because of unconscious biases and opinions that they don't even realize they hold. Now, if you think I was beating around the bush, I assure you I have a point with all of this, but now to get to the subject of the video. Warfare is a movie directed by Alex Garland and Ray Mendoza. It is a recounting of a surveillance mission in Iraq gone wrong that Mendoza was actually a part of. It doesn't have what you could call a protagonist, it doesn't have a villain, it doesn't even have a score. It's billed as a no bullshit, no frills, unfiltered, real-time look at what could happen and what does happen in a war zone. Even the title is clinical and cold. Warfare. It's not telling a story, it's just a look at an experience that many people have had while serving in the military. I read a few interviews from Garland and Mendoza about the creation of this movie, and it seems like they tried their best to make as detailed of a look at this particular scenario as possible, foregoing narrative and structure and just trying to retell this event as accurately as they could, relying almost entirely on the memories of those who were there and any evidence from the event to quote-unquote write the movie. As purely a technical exercise, this movie is pretty good. The acting is all great, the cinematography is grounded and realistic, the sound design is genuinely impressive, but my issues arise when you try and examine this movie in any capacity. This is just an hour and a half of upsetting, brutal, intense imagery with no comment. It's committed to getting every detail exactly right. And while yes, it is technically impressive, I just question what the point of this movie was. It's a characterless, fly-on-the-wall look at this series of events. You're not really meant to latch onto anyone in particular. You're not even really supposed to hate the people that are shooting at our cast. Nobody's given any reason to be there other than to fight. And this is where I start to feel a disconnect between this movie's intention and execution. Now, even though this movie set out to not say anything at all, I still gleaned the idea that war itself is pointless. And I definitely got that idea from watching the movie. I didn't just come into it thinking that already. I mean, I did think that already, but I wasn't thinking that this movie was going to necessarily tell me that. And while I did get the idea that the war is pointless, I didn't really get any reason as to why. It feels like this point comes up in the movie by accident. Men fight and die overseas, and all this movie has to say about it is, sucks, right? It doesn't really have any interest in interrogating any questions that are worth asking. Like, why are these men being sent to fight and die in an endless war? It feels like this movie is almost grasping at something worth talking about. A perfect analog to this in my eyes is The Passion of the Christ. Another bloody, brutal movie with little to say other than just look at how these characters were tortured. The Passion of the Christ has no meaning if you're not someone who cares about Jesus, and as someone who does, I still didn't like it. It is pretty much entirely torture porn. Both movies feel like I'm at a museum where the only exhibit is a man bleeding out in a glass box. No plaque or other exhibits around, just brutality for its own sake. Now, there is a comment to be made about how that in itself is transgressive. Dadaism, I believe, but this movie is not a Dadaist work of literature at all. I didn't really get anything out of this movie other than being uncomfortable for an hour and a half. It's not reveling in the chaos, it's not trying to make these characters seem like heroes, it's not trying to do anything other than show you what's happening and not comment any further. Or is it? This movie ends with a title thanking the subjects of the story for always answering the call. And I just have a couple questions. What call? Whose call? Why are they being called? What are they being called to do? It's right here where I caught the only instance of explicit bias in this movie. The call as an abstract concept. The call to serve your country no matter what your country is trying to do. Blind fealty to those commanding you. People just following orders. I don't have anything against veterans or people serving in the army on principle. I think people join up for different reasons. Sometimes that means taking up arms to pay for college, you know? I get it. The heel of capitalism is heavy on all of our necks. But it's ultimately the lack of acknowledgement of why any of these people are here or what is even fucking going on that irks me. Now, you may look at my efforts to analyze this movie as futile, since Garland and Mendoza seem pretty committed to the idea that this movie has nothing to examine within it at all, but I don't think that's true. For one, I and many others think it is really hard to make a war movie that is anti-war, or even neutral on the concept, and whether or not this movie is pro or anti-war is worth investigating, in my opinion. There's a famous and often misremembered quote from Francois Truffaut from an interview with George Siskel, where he says, "I find that violence is very ambiguous in movies. For example, some films claim to be anti-war, but I don't think I've really seen an anti-war film. Every film about war ends up being pro-war." And I don't necessarily agree with this, although I haven't fully worked out if I think that there are just some notable exceptions to this rule, or if it just isn't a rule at all. I certainly see where he's coming from, and at least he has an opinion on the subject. I think this is worth bringing up because Garland and Mendoza have been so insistent that this movie doesn't have anything to say at all, and it's just an honest portrayal of events that happened. Garland himself is aware of the Truffaut quote, and he seems to think pretty similarly to how I do about it, although he's careful not to say that his movie is or isn't anti-war. In an interview with Slash Film, he discusses the quote and has this to say about whether or not movies can or can't be anti-war. There have been anti-war films before. I personally think it's hard to give an honest account of war that isn't anti-war, in as much as that it would say this is best avoided. It would simply be better if this didn't have to happen. Sometimes it does have to happen. There will be circumstances in history where it was unavoidable, and other circumstances in history where it would have been avoidable if people had been more honest about what it entailed. This comes off as, in my opinion, waffling. Like, yeah, I agree, you can boil down anti-war movies' messaging to, it would be better if this didn't happen, but that's a pretty shallow way of looking at it. He's also basically saying that his movie ended up as an anti-war movie by accident, which is really funny. Like, damn, giving an honest retelling of wartime experiences gave you the impression that war sucks? Got anything else to comment on? It almost feels like he didn't have this opinion until he came to set one day and then saw how terrible it all was and was like, damn, this shit sucks. I feel confident in saying this wasn't actually the case. He's not a 4-year-old after all. But this is why I don't like it when people pretend that they can tell an unbiased story like this. The pursuit of being completely unbiased and objective results in cases where, when pressed about the greater context that your work exists in, you either come off as, at best, indifferent or, at worst, stupid. In our world, being quote-unquote unbiased often means not highlighting certain details, such as, why was the US military in Iraq to begin with? So much of the surrounding context behind the Iraq War is not brought up at all. Never mind any kind of comment on the imperialist state of America or the profit-driven motivations behind war or anything worth commenting on. If you want to be unbiased, you have to at least try and look at the whole picture. Garland said in that same Slash Film interview, it doesn't have to be the whole picture. You can have another movie which is doing a whole other thing, but that's what this movie is trying to do. But I think that is a really shallow way to deal with a subject like this or art in general. I'm not saying this has to be the whole picture either, but if you're only going to look at one piece of the puzzle, you can't be unbiased. The bias in this movie comes from the unwillingness to acknowledge anything that's not immediately happening in this particular scenario. Unwillingness to acknowledge greater context is a form of bias. The other day, I was watching a video by Fredda about how some fascist content creator spreads Nazi propaganda by pretending to be unbiased, and he brought up a good point about historiography and how historians are constantly subject to their own biases. I highly recommend you watch the video, and I've got it linked in the description if you're interested. The point I wanted to reference here, though, is the thought that objective historical fact without analysis does not exist because of the fact that any historian reporting on any history is making decisions on what is and isn't relevant to the event they're reporting on, thereby assigning significance to particular events and de-emphasizing others based on what they think is relevant. This is not an indictment of history or historians or anything like that, by the way. I just think it's incredibly fascinating. But it also further illuminates why I don't think Alex Garland and Ray Mendoza's attempts to objectively retell this scenario were anything but futile from the start. You might think it's a little dramatic to compare this war movie to the deliberation that goes into the documentation of history, but if you think that, I would encourage you to take it up with the directors, because by their own admission, this was an attempt to have a factual retelling of events. I am just not compelled by the attitude towards the making of this movie at all, and it comes through all facets of it. This film is at war with itself, trying to stay unbiased. This is a deliberately hollow film, and by virtue of it being deliberately hollow and devoid of anything to say, it unintentionally turns into a piece of pro-war film. Even military propaganda. Other reviews of this movie I've seen have said that this is a movie uninterested in making heroes of its subjects, but the whole reason Ray Mendoza got into filmmaking, according to him, was because he worked with the Navy SEALs as part of their efforts to increase recruitment numbers by portrayals of the military in film. I'm not even saying that his sole purpose when making this movie was to pump up those recruit numbers. He says he's been wanting to tell this story for a while, and part of it was because one of his squad mates doesn't remember it because of the trauma that he experienced while he was there. And that's kind of cool, honestly. If you want to tell your buddy a story, just make a movie about it, I guess. I definitely don't think that Garland and Mendoza are lying about their intentions behind this movie, but I do think that their insistence on not saying anything at all unintentionally wound up with this movie coming off as military propaganda anyway. Without the intent to say anything, not only will the audience be able to assign their own meanings to it more easily, but your unconscious biases will rise to the surface. It's only through the peripheral that any meaning can be wrung from this film. In theory, it doesn't set out to make these characters heroes in a story, but I would argue this ends up happening anyway because we follow their journey so closely. We feel empathy when we see Eddie from Stranger Things get his legs destroyed by a thunder gun, and we as an audience want him and the rest of the platoon to get out of there because we like seeing stories wrap up with happy endings. And when they eventually do make it out of there, it's a sigh of relief. The fact that we're humans not only makes this film fundamentally incapable of coming off as unbiased, but it informs assumptions that the audience will make by the mere fact that this is a movie being presented to us in the theater. There are no heroes on paper, sure, but we're following this platoon of soldiers and we automatically attach ourselves to this platoon Because they're there, and we see them partying to Eric Prydz in the opening moments. There are no villains on paper either, but the Iraqi soldiers shooting at and blowing up Eddie from Stranger Things certainly aren't the movie's heroes. I keep harping on Eddie from Stranger Things, and let it be known that I don't have any issue with Joseph Quinn or any of the other actors in this movie. But the decision to make this cast mostly well-known Hollywood pretty boys also serves to make these guys the heroes of the story. Noah Centineo is in this. And that guy was White Boy of the Month for like 6 straight months in 2018. Maybe a year.
So, you gonna show me how you squirt or what?
He was on an unprecedented run as far as White Boys of the Month go. If this movie was mostly unknown actors, I don't even think I would be bringing this up. I actually think the idea here was fine if it came from a different place. If this movie was all various white boys of the times and it was a movie that actually had something to say, I think this would have been a great call. Like imagine, for instance, you have a favorite white boy of the month, and then you see trailers for this movie and you go see it because he's in it. And then he's wrapped up in a story about how war is pointless and how soldiers fight and die overseas for no reason other than the interests of rich assholes who don't care if they live or die. The guy from To All the Boys I've Loved Before and Sierra Burgess is a fucking dickhead or whatever that movie was called, getting his legs blown off by an IED would be super effective in that case. If Noah Centineo became a crawler on screen and the context was this, I feel like it would have been way more effective.
You're gonna show me how you...
And even if the movie didn't exactly align with my beliefs, if it just had something to say, you know, then I would have been more attached to it. I only brought up the instance that I did because it was, you know, just something. This movie could have been pro-war on purpose and I probably would have liked it more because it would have had something to say. Instead, what we got is something that has the same emotional weight as a medical training video. You know, something that they show in med school to show how a surgery is supposed to be properly done. You know, you might get a little squeamish, but apart from that, that's probably it. There's so much implied meaning here that I don't think Garland and Mendoza were cognizant of while they were making this movie. Watching this was really frustrating for me because of that mindset. The idea that a guy whose best movie came out 11 years ago and a soldier from Iraq could tell an objective story about what happened here. And even if I did think that this movie worked, I don't think it would have been successful in that objective of honestly and truthfully telling this story from an objective standpoint because of the mere fact that memory is very unreliable. Even if you had everyone who was there telling this story and completely agreeing with each other about what happened, the fact of the matter is that every single one of their memories has been affected by the passage of 20 years. And you cannot possibly hope to get everything right in a case like this. Garland has acknowledged this, yes, but I still think it is really arrogant to tout your movie as this honest, objective retelling of this story when all you're basing it off of is memory and pictures. If you wanted to just tell a story from 20 years ago, that's perfectly fine. But to bill this as an objective, factual, 95% accurate telling of this story that happened just rubs me the wrong way. This movie would have been a perfectly serviceable war flick without this framing. If it was just like Saving Private Ryan or something, I wouldn't have an issue with it. I can recognize the pro-war aspects of a movie like that and still enjoy it. It doesn't mean I have to throw the whole movie away. Marvel movies have a lot of military propaganda in them, and I still love those. Recognizing the flaws of something you like is not the same thing as hating it. But make no mistake, I hate this movie. Without a coherent message or even the intent to say one, all this movie has left are the filmmaker's unconscious biases. And to sit there for an hour and a half and have this movie pretend that they're not there was really annoying. 3 out of 10. Fuck you. Sorry that this video took so long. Life got in the way. A tree fell on my house. But we're back. This script did take a little bit to write, but I haven't abandoned YouTube. So this video is going to come out probably the week of like the 26th of May, 2025. And in June, I have plans to shoot some videos with some friends and hopefully get some really good content out of it. So thank you for watching as always. And I have this new bit that I want to do where at the end of each video, I show you what album I have on my wall right now. And today I have And When I Close My Eyes, I'm Still Spinning by Hospitality. Kennesaw Screamo. Represent. It is a great record, and not only is it amazing, but it sounds amazing because the vinyl master was done by Will Killingsworth, who, if you know anything about anything, you know that guy's the GOAT. So shout out Hospitality, shout out Science on Records, go listen to my podcast, listen to my band. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.